This building, which looks more like a warehouse, contains over $100 million. This building is the cash distribution center in the city of Los Angeles. Every day, armored trucks enter and exit, transporting cash to and from the banks. These armored trucks are heavily guarded, with armed guards and even armed drivers. But one man will monitor, think, and plan to rob this building. He will recruit a gang of 6 people. And the strange thing is that none of these 6 have any criminal records or have ever stolen anything in their lives before. So imagine being transformed from an ordinary clean person into a thief who steals tens of millions without any previous criminal activity. Despite the meticulous plan and smart execution of the operation, ultimately it will be a small plastic piece they left by mistake that will turn everything against them. If you want to know the secret of this piece, follow the story to the end. If someone needs cash, they usually go to the bank and withdraw from their account. But where do banks get the cash from? Usually, there are specialized private or government companies responsible for cash transportation. This means there are armored trucks with armed guards and drivers transporting this cash to the banks. The story I'm telling you today happened in Los Angeles in 1997. One of the specialized companies in cash transportation was a company called Danbar Armored. This company owned cash distribution centers in cities, where cash accumulated from the central bank or the Federal Reserve, before being distributed to local banks via armored trucks. Danbar was responsible for storing and distributing this cash to the banks. The building in front of you was one of Danbar's largest cash distribution centers. This center held over $100 million daily, more than any local bank literally. So if you were a thief and wanted to target a place for robbery, this center would be the ideal target, especially since security here was less than in banks. Why? Because banks are public places, anyone can enter and exit. However, this place is private and does not receive customers. Of course, there were security systems and guards present. But the point is that the security measures here were not as strong as those in banks, despite having more cash. Let's take a quick tour of this building. From the outside, it looks like an ordinary one-story building, resembling more of a warehouse. There's a gate where trucks carrying cash enter, and there are rooms for loading and unloading cash. The small door is an entrance for employees. Outside, there's a surveillance camera covering all directions, but it's the only camera outside. Inside, there are many cameras covering all the hallways and rooms, especially those containing cash. Now, let's take a look at the building's layout. There's an entrance for employees, and a room called the guard room, also known as the lunchroom because the guards eat there. Inside this room, there's a smaller room called the control room, which contains screens displaying camera feeds. There's usually a guard monitoring these screens 24/7, but note that there are only 4 screens for about 25 cameras. This means not all cameras are displayed at the same time, they rotate. Let's go back to the plan. The loading and unloading area directly overlooks the external parking lot, and next to it is the vault room. Inside the vault room, there's the main vault where cash is stored, secured with a very thick iron door. Outside the vault room is the cash preparation area, where accountants prepare cash for distribution. So now you have an idea of the building's layout, as we'll come back to it later. As mentioned, the building didn't have the strongest security measures. But the problem any thief would face is not being able to easily explore it and know its entrances and exits. They would be ignorant of security measures, unable to easily enter, explore the place, and find their way, for example, to the vault. You might think of some banks that have safe deposit boxes. So, it's complicated because this is a private place. And here you'll be surprised to know that the mastermind behind this operation was actually someone who had never stolen anything before. This would be his first crime. He wasn't involved in crime and had no problems with the police. His record was clean. So, how could someone like this target a difficult and unknown place like the cash distribution center? The reason lies with one of the center's employees, a security guard named Al Meese. He was an ordinary person, as mentioned, with no previous records. But being a security guard, he knew how to use weapons, guns, radios, and surveillance devices. His job was inspecting and maintaining the trucks entering and exiting the center daily, ensuring their locks and security systems were intact and everything inside the trucks was in good condition. Imagine seeing millions of dollars passing in front of you every day. Anyone working in such a place would start thinking, if all this money were mine, what could I do? Nice, as an employee in this place, had these thoughts. But the most important thing was how he could make this money truly his own. Here, the idea of robbery began to grow in his mind, aided by someone close to him working in the same center. His girlfriend, Tamiko Carnes. Tamiko, the security recording devices manager, had knowledge of the center's security details and was able to provide valuable information to Nice. This made him more prepared to execute the idea. He began thinking about the right people to involve in the operation because he couldn't do it alone. He had been pondering this for a few weeks, but suddenly, in the midst of this contemplation, his girlfriend Tamiko entered and told him she had been fired from her job. The company's management accused her of attempting to steal some cash bags. They found them placed in an isolated corner without surveillance camera coverage, and they accused her because she was in circumstantial evidence, even though they were not conclusive. This was enough for them to fire her from her job. He didn't know whether she actually tried to steal some money, or if it was just a bad coincidence she found herself in the middle of. After they fired his girlfriend, the relationship with management became tense, and all eyes were on him. He began to feel blamed even though he hadn't done anything wrong so far. He felt he needed to act quickly in the process. The first thing he had to do was to form a team because it was impossible to carry out this operation alone. He decided that this team would consist of people close to him. The first person he discussed the matter with was his close friend, Eugene Hill. Eugene had no criminal record and worked in the same profession as he did. He was a security guard and had experience in using weapons and security matters in general. Convincing Eugene was easy for him because he was actually one of his best friends and knew his nature. So he knew he would agree, but he had to choose the rest of the members more carefully. He had to be sure of the nature of anyone he asked to join them because if he asked the wrong person, they might expose them. He contacted two additional people, the first named Freddie McCarthy, who was also a security guard and was one of his oldest friends whom they had known since they were 10 years old, and the second named Terry Brown, who was also a security guard he met through work. They had previously worked together as bouncers at a nightclub. Now he had to convince them to join the gang and carry out the operation with him. He gathered them in the parking area and began drawing a plan on the ground with chalk for the distribution center building, explaining to them the details of his plan, where they would enter, and what exactly they would do. He spoke confidently and intelligently, explaining to them in a way that showed he had studied the matter well. When the group saw their enthusiastic and confident friend, they became excited with him and told him they were with him. So, they became members of the team, 4 of them, all people he trusted with his life. The next bold step he took was to go to work with a camera and start taking pictures of the place. The excuse was that he was taking souvenir photos. So he took pictures of his colleagues at work and the accountants working in the treasury room. It seemed like he was compiling a file about all the people and places in the center. He wanted to show these photos to his friends so they would have a clear idea of how to move around the place, the locations of the cameras in general, and even the shapes of the employees they might encounter. Although taking the pictures posed some risks, he was one of the responsible persons for the place, so no one would question him. After gathering all this information and studying it, he drew a detailed plan of the building and met again with his friends to tell them how they would execute the operation in detail. The plan was as follows. First, they would move in 2 cars. The first car would be a regular sedan, and the second car would be a small delivery truck. They would rent this truck and park the small car a short distance from the distribution center. Then, they would all ride in the truck and go to the center, entering the building through the door using the key he had, and could be used at night before the end of this weekend. That night would be the night when most of the money would be in the center, and at the same time, it would be the least guarded night because it would be the weekend. During that night, They would leave the vault door open because the accountants would reconcile the incoming money and deposit it into the vault. Since the amount of money would be huge, they would not open and close the vault every period, which would help them. After entering through the door, they would avoid surveillance cameras where they knew the locations and angles of all the cameras, and there would be only one guard that night. And they knew exactly when this guard would have his dinner. So, they would surprise him while he was having dinner. After capturing the guard, they would enter the treasury room where the accountants would be, accompanied by a person called the monitor, who had a button under his desk. Once this button was pressed, an alarm would be activated, and the police would be called. Therefore, they had to capture the monitor before he had the opportunity to press the button. After securing all the employees, the last step would be to enter the vault and take the money and transport it in their small truck. But they had to be cautious and not take any new or freshly printed money, because this money came in bundles and its serial numbers were sequential, making it easy to track. And this was an important point. After a detailed study of the plan, he felt they needed an additional member in the team. And here entered the new member, Thomas Johnson, who was their friend and also worked in the security field as a security guard. So, they now became 5 members in the gang, all working in the same field, security and its owners. Every day, they would review the details and study the timing, movements, and pictures, until they memorized the shapes of the employees and even the locations of the cameras. As I told you, there are a large number of cameras inside the building, exactly 25 cameras. But the control room has only 4 screens. These screens swap between the cameras, meaning each screen regularly displays a feed from a different camera. For example, every 10 seconds, the screen starts displaying a new camera, and the screens continue switching between camera feeds. So, it's very important to know the timing of these cameras and the feed switching. For instance, when they want to prevent passage through a certain corridor, they must ensure that the camera for that corridor is not broadcasting at that time. Because if the guard sees them, he'll trigger the alarm, and that's game over. Therefore, it was impossible for them to know these timings and the method of feed switching between screens if they didn't have insider information. And this information, of course, came from Tomiko, Alan's friend, and as we said, she was the real responsible for the camera recording systems before the job was explained. So, she knew all these details. And thus, they knew exactly the timing when each camera would be broadcasting to the screens the guard was monitoring. And they could adjust their movements to avoid all the cameras. Imagine Alan trained his comrades professionally, timing them and calculating speed and distance for each passage they needed to cross so that when they entered the building, they were fully aware of the timing and speed they needed. Everything had to be calculated and precise. At that moment, everything was going smoothly. The plan became clear, and they trained on it daily. And now, we entered September 1997, the month they planned to execute the operation. However, Alan was adamant. He wanted to carry out the operation at the end of the month. He wanted to continue training his comrades until they were completely confident they had reached the required level. But an unexpected surprise happened that was unforeseen. Alan received a call from the company's management, informing him that he had been fired and must hand over his keys immediately. The news was a shock to Alan and greatly disrupted his plans. But the first thing he did was to hurry and duplicate the keys before handing them over to the company. Alan felt that the operation must be carried out at the earliest opportunity. The waiting time was over. So, he called his comrades and told them they would execute the plan the following Friday, which happened to be September 12, 1997. Everyone began preparing immediately. Alan asked his closest friend, Eugene, to rent the truck they would use in the operation. It was a regular truck, perhaps of medium size. The second step for Alan was to fabricate an excuse for his absence. He knew that after being recently fired, the employees who had been laid off previously would be under suspicion, including him. So, he had to find an excuse for his absence. Eugene, his friend, said his family would be hosting a big party, and many people, relatives, and friends would attend. So, all they had to do was attend the party. In the middle of the party, they would sneak away secretly, carry out the operation, and then return immediately. All the people present at the party would witness that they were already there, especially since most of them were relatives and friends. We arrived at the day of the operation, which was Friday, September 12, 1997. Alan gathered his comrades at Eugene's house and began reviewing the plan again. When they reviewed the details, they felt they needed an additional person with them. So, instead of just 5, they decided to have 6 people. One person would stay with the truck, and another with the guard they would restrain, leaving only 3 or 4 inside the vault room. Alan wanted to make sure their number was greater than or equal to the number of employees so they could completely control the situation. Thus, the 6th member was added to the team, literally just 8 hours before the operation. This member's name was Eric Boyd, and in fact, he was Alan's niece's son, married to her sister. So, he was a trusted person. Now, the team consisted of 6 people because Eric hadn't trained with them, and it was difficult for him to know all the details in these few hours. His task was to stay with the truck. At the end of the meeting, they repeated the plan several times to ensure each person understood their role precisely. They agreed that during the operation, they would contact each other using numbers, from 1 to 6. Each person would call the next person using their number to avoid revealing their identity. Of course, they would have radio devices for communication. Finally, they agreed that if any of them were caught, they shouldn't speak, and the rest would take care of their family and ensure they lived a comfortable life, especially financially, until they were released from prison. Time passed quickly, and at 10 p.m., the 6 of them headed to the party, where this event would serve as their excuse for absence. They entered the party and began interacting with people and talking to them to make their presence noticeable. Then, at 11 p.m., they began leaving the party one by one, with short intervals between them to avoid drawing attention. 2 of them joined a regular sedan, while the other 4 joined the small truck they had rented. They walked together on the road until they reached a location near the center. There, the small car stopped, and the 2 who were in the car joined the others in the truck. The driver, who was the new member of the team, remained in his regular clothes. As for the 5 inside the truck's compartment, they changed their clothes and put on all black attire, masks, and gloves, and prepared their weapons. Then, they set off in the truck towards the center. When they arrived near the center, Alan immediately realized that luck was on their side. The external camera was aimed at the pickup truck in the parking lot. This was the patrol monitor's car, who monitored the movement inside the vault and manned the accountants. Alan knew this monitor and realized that he was crazy about his car and valued it greatly. And the new car was just for the monitor. So, the monitor asked the guard to direct the external camera towards his car because the external camera could move. Instead of directing the camera towards the door as usual, the guard directed the camera towards the monitor's car, which was good for them. In any case, Alan and his comrades knew the timing of the appearance of the cameras on the screens. So, even the external camera, they could avoid without being detected. And since it was directed elsewhere, it was a blessing for them. In the end, they opened the door using the key Alan duplicated before handing it over, and they entered. Now, they were facing the hardest task, which was to avoid all the cameras inside the building, especially in the corridors. Here lay the benefit of the training they had undergone throughout the past period. They knew the locations of all the cameras and knew the time they needed to move. When the camera was set to broadcast images on the screen, they stood in their places, and when the camera changed, the broadcast moved instantly. These cameras were precise in timing. The broadcast system changed every specified number of seconds. And they knew this because Tomiko's girlfriend was literally responsible for these systems before she resigned from her job. And now, if we return to the plan that was presented, before the gang entered through this door and made their way through the corridors, avoiding surveillance cameras until they reached the guard's room. As mentioned, there was supposed to be only one guard on duty that night, and it was a little past midnight. And the guard on duty that night probably wasn't monitoring the camera screens at this time because of his dinner, which was an additional scheme by the gang. At the time of execution, this was intentional, and they indeed stormed the guard's room and found him having his meal. So they grabbed him and bound him immediately, meaning they didn't even need to avoid surveillance cameras in the first place, because the guard wasn't monitoring the screens while having his meal. This, in itself, was a clever move by the gang, and they wouldn't have been able to do it without their knowledge of the guard's behaviors, as they had worked with them and interacted with them for years. Anyway, after tying up the guard, they took his weapon. And then, the person immediately took the key to the vault room from him. After that, the person went to the small monitoring room containing the 4 screens to check the number of employees in the vault room. At that moment, there was an accountant monitoring. Although everything was going according to plan, there were always things that went out of control. What happened at that moment was another guard entering the building. This guard was one of the truck drivers, and truck drivers weren't supposed to enter the building at this time. Their task was supposed to be completed, and all the drivers had gone home. And of course, as mentioned, these drivers were also guards, making this an unexpected surprise for the gang. But luckily for them, this driver didn't have his weapon with him at that moment. So they managed to apprehend him and tie him easily, throwing him to the ground alongside the second guard. One of the 5 remained with the bound guards to watch over them, while the other 4 moved from the guard's room to the vault room. As mentioned, the person took the room keys from the guard, but before they entered the room, he glanced through the room's surrounding glass to ensure there were no surprises or unexpected persons inside the room. Indeed, they found only 3 people, the monitor and 2 accountant employees. Immediately, the people decided that their entry should be quick and sudden, and they should first control the monitor because under his table was an alarm button that could be pressed to alert the police. Indeed, the monitor complied immediately, didn't speak, and didn't resist when escorted. Then the thieves began to deal with the employees, and they were a bit rough in dealing with them. When they grabbed one of the accountants and forcefully dropped her to the ground, she screamed in pain. So the others tried to console her and reassure her that everything would be okay. Then they asked the monitor if there was anyone else or any other employee in the building. And the monitor answered that they were the only ones there. Indeed, the gang thoroughly searched the building and ensured that there was no one else besides them. After seizing control of the place, they moved on to the next crucial step, which was stealing the money. First, they had to communicate with their driver, Eric, via the radio to open the truck door to enter the money loading area. But the surprise came when Eric returned with the truck. He had hit the sidewall, and a piece of the rear panel broke, which the thieves didn't notice. Then they entered the vault and began stealing the money, which was in bundles, all in $20 bills. As mentioned earlier, they had to avoid the new money that had recently been printed, because it was linked to traceable serial numbers. So people directed them to the old bundles containing old money, which they took and put into money trash bags. Then took these money bags and put them into the truck. After that, they started filling the truck with money bags until it was completely filled. And of course, before leaving, they had to get rid of any evidence behind them. And the next step was to sabotage the door lock. They broke the door lock to make it look like it was broken, which was supposed to divert suspicion from the people even more. After finishing everything, it was time to flee. But they faced a problem. Because of the huge amount of money they carried in the truck, there was no place for all of them in it. Their plan was to all sit in the truck, then drop off the people and Eugene at the sedan car they parked nearby. But their operation's success was greater than expected. So, what was the solution? Should they unload some bags from the truck to leave space for the remaining 2? This might have been the most logical solution, but the members said no. We won't give up anything from our loot, and they closed the truck door, telling the other 4 to go, and only he and Eugene remained alone. But the people had an idea. Remember the pickup truck parked outside, which was the monitor's car? Simply, they decided to take the pickup truck. They went to the restrained monitor and pulled the car key from his pocket. And while Eugene took the pickup truck, they left the place. Of course, they didn't intend to take the car with them because it could be evidence against them, and it could help the police track them through it, so all they wanted was to reach their sedan car parked nearby. They exchanged cars and left the surveillance car there in the same spot, allowing the escape operation to succeed. However, the operation wasn't over yet. The last part involved them returning to the party they had left. This party would serve as their alibi. After leaving, they immediately went to Eugene's house, where they stored their weapons, and changed their clothes back to what they wore for the party. Then they went out again with the truck and the car, and headed back to the party location. The money was still in the truck, and they arrived back at the party around 1:30, approximately 90 minutes after they left. When they arrived at the party, they parked the truck in front of the house, which was filled with tens of millions. They entered the party again and mingled with the people. About an hour after the gang left the Danbar Employees Center, they finally managed to free themselves. They immediately contacted the police, who arrived with the FBI. They started investigating what happened. First, the investigators noticed that the outer door lock was broken. But upon examination, they realized it was just a cover. There were no signs of forced entry on the door. They only found the broken lock, indicating that the thieves likely had a key to the door, suggesting that insiders, people who worked at the location, may have executed the operation. The second clue the investigators found was the plastic piece that broke off the car's headlight when the driver bumped into the wall while entering the truck. This plastic piece didn't match any of the company's trucks, indicating that it likely came from the gang's truck. These were all the clues the investigators could find. The place was clean. The thieves didn't leave any traces behind. As for Alan and his associates, they rented a small storage unit to stash the money until the situation calmed down, and they could divide the loot comfortably. Danbar Company management calculated the missing amount to be around $19 million, which, considering today's value, was close to $30 million. This was undoubtedly the largest cash theft in American history at that time, and likely globally afterward. Of course, there would be larger thefts later, like the crazy Brazilian bank robbery we will talk about in the next videos. Imagine that most of the stolen amount consisted of $20 bills, so the money was voluminous. This made the authorities fear copycat attempts, afraid that others might try similar thefts at cash distribution centers. To avoid this problem, they decided not to disclose the actual amount stolen. The media only reported that more than $1 million were stolen from the Danbar Center. They didn't reveal the actual amount. As the investigators delved into the details of the case, they realized that all evidence pointed to an inside job. This meant that one or more people who executed the operation were working at the location. Knowing the location of the recording devices, especially the second hidden recording device in one of the offices, indicated this. How could the thieves know about this device unless they or someone familiar with the place were involved? Moreover, the broken lock, which seemed like a cover-up for using a real key to enter, led the investigators to interrogate all employees at the center. They questioned about 130 people, including current and recently terminated employees. During the interrogation, they conducted lie detector tests using a heart rate monitor. Only 2 people failed the test, Alan and his girlfriend Tomiko. Additionally, there was extra evidence against Alan. Remember the employee who injured her shoulder when they forced her to lie on the floor? Alan reassured her, saying, "Don't worry, my dear, everything will be fine." This employee recognized Alan's voice and manner of speaking, so she was among those who testified against him. With these failures in the lie detector test and the employee's testimony, the company management expected the police to arrest Alan. However, the investigators knew that this evidence wasn't sufficient. They needed conclusive evidence to charge Alan with the crime. Despite focusing on Alan during this period, the investigators ultimately couldn't find conclusive evidence against him. Imagine, a whole year passed, and the case remained open with no new developments. Despite the involvement of various government agencies, including the Los Angeles Police Department, the FBI, and even the IRS, known for being the strongest financial institution in America, tracking money, all their efforts were in vain. In the end, they decided to offer a huge reward of $250,000 for anyone who could provide information leading to the capture of the perpetrators. The reason for the investigators' and agencies' difficulties in apprehending the criminals was Alan's cunning. Even after the operation, Alan divided the money among them and warned them to be cautious in spending it. The dumbest thing they could do was to suddenly buy luxury cars, mansions, or even go on world tours. All of these things could attract attention to them, so they had to be smart and not spend the money lavishly, especially since the investigation was still ongoing. One of the smart things Alan did was to open a business specializing in entertainment. This business served as a front for laundering their money, allowing them to use it more comfortably. For those unfamiliar with money laundering, it's simply turning stolen money into legitimate income. They take the stolen money, record it as income from their business, claim it as profits, and even pay taxes on it. Then, it becomes legal money in the eyes of the law. This laundering process had to be done slowly and subtly. They couldn't suddenly inject millions from their business. They could only launder tens of thousands each month. They could gradually increase it, maybe get $100,000 or $200,000 at most. But they couldn't bring in millions at once. If they did, they would attract attention to themselves. The operation was slow, but the most important thing was that it was safe. Due to their caution, the gang remained hidden from sight for 2 full years. 2 years, and the investigators couldn't find a way to catch them. Unfortunately, one of them would become careless and compromise them all. That one was none other than Eugene, Alan's closest friend and the first person to join the team. Eugene felt after all this time that they had succeeded on their own. So, he took $100,000 in cash from the loot and went to a real estate office to buy land as an investment. After Eugene handed over the purchase papers and signed them, tying them with Danbar Company tape, the real estate agent immediately sensed something was wrong. But he didn't show any suspicion. This was what Eugene didn't anticipate. He didn't even think that the real estate owner would doubt the money. He thought the incident was over after 2 years had passed. But the real estate owner suspected immediately upon seeing the money. Yet, he didn't show any doubt. This was because Eugene knew there was a $250,000 reward for anyone who could provide information about the thieves. So, the real estate owner gave Eugene the purchase papers and let him sign them, making the deal go through as if nothing had happened. Therefore, the office owner seized the money, and as soon as Eugene left, he contacted the police. Investigators, along with Danbar Company employees, were summoned to examine the money. After examination, they confirmed that the ribbons on the money indeed dated back to the day of the robbery, because these ribbons were stamped with dates in small print. These dates on the ribbons traced back to September 11th and 12th, 1997, indicating the day of the theft. Now, all eyes of the investigators turned to Eugene, and they began to interrogate him and the people around him, including his relatives and friends. They quickly discovered that Eugene was a close friend of Alan, who had been suspected from the beginning. They compiled a short list of suspects, noting Eugene's financial movements. They found out that Eugene was writing checks from his sister's bank account, and his sister did not have sufficient income to write such checks, which was additional evidence. After money laundering, this was another clear evidence. However, the decisive evidence came from the red piece, the plastic piece that broke off from a truck lamp on the day of the robbery. This piece helped the investigators determine that it likely came from a rented truck. They managed to identify the type and model of the truck. So they collected rental records from all the stores and companies that rented such trucks in the area. Of course, at that time, all these records were paper-based only. They couldn't search through computers with a click of a button as they can now. So the investigators spent some time searching through all these records and comparing them to their list of suspects. As mentioned earlier, the one who rented the truck was Eugene himself, using his driver's license. While searching through the rental records, they found his name. According to the rental contract, Lou rented the truck on September 12th, the day of the operation, and returned it the next day, September 13th. So the evidence against Eugene became clear and compelling. Shortly thereafter, the investigators went to his house, arrested him, and took him to the police station for questioning. Although the gang agreed that if any of them were caught, they should remain silent and not tell the investigators anything, and their friends would take care of their families. Actions speak louder than words. When actually under the pressure of investigation and interrogation, things change. The investigators told Eugene that if he didn't confess and reveal the details of the operation and disclose his accomplices, his sister would be implicated because Eugene was writing checks from her bank account. She would be implicated and charged with complicity in money laundering and theft, serious charges. So Eugene faced a difficult choice. But in the end, his family came before his friends, and indeed Eugene confessed to everything. He confessed to his role in the operation, how they carried it out, and disclosed the identities of all his accomplices. After that, the investigations continued for several months, during which the 6 were arrested. After some time, they were charged with robbery and money laundering. They all accused Eugene and pointed to him in court, saying he was the mastermind of the operation and convinced them to participate with him, and that's what happened. So when the leader and planner of the operation are convicted, they are sentenced to the maximum penalty. He was sentenced to 24 years in prison. As for his accomplices, they received lighter sentences, ranging from 10 to 12 years. I'm sure the biggest regret he felt was his involvement of his friend Eugene. Eugene, who was his closest friend and the first person he brought into the operation, turned out to be the downfall in the end. And his stupid mistake of taking the money to the real estate office is what brought him down in the end. But on the bright side for them, the Federal Investigation Bureau could only recover $7 million out of the $19 million stolen, meaning $12 million still remain unknown. Maybe they still have it. Only God knows where they hid it. Despite the long years they spent in prison, at least they came out knowing they are millionaires. And that brings us to the end of our story. As usual, if you liked the story, don't forget to press the like button. And if you're not subscribed to the channel, subscribe and press the bell button. There are more amazing stories like this one that you can watch. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video. Goodbye.